Today on the show, the pleasure of speaking with Ellie Perlman, founder and CEO of Blue Lake Capital. Now, Ellie is also, like myself, she's an expat, and she is originally from Israel. Now, Ellie grew up in a very blue-collar household, and through hard work and determination, Ellie put herself through law school, and eventually she came to the United States to attend MIT. She had a very successful career in the tech startup world, but before she realized she had a bigger calling, and that was to go start Blue Lake Capital, which is a real estate syndication group. And she quit her high-paying six-figure job in the corporate world to chase her dream. She's very passionate about creating wealth from nothing, and I'm really excited to have her on the show today to share her incredible story and her knowledge with us. But enough out of me. Let's get her out here. G'day, Ellie. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you, Reed?
I'm doing much better, being a Friday. Locked up in the house. For those people who probably when this podcast comes out in 2 or 3 months' time, we are locked down for coronavirus. So we're doing a little bit of a makeshift studio today, which is, excuse the background noise if there's any background noise, but it's awesome to have you on the show. I know you and I, you're also in Los Angeles, right? You're in Santa Monica.
Yes, not so far away from you.
No,
actually.
exactly.
Yeah.
But let's dive into it. The first question I always ask all my guests is rewind the clock and tell me how you made your first ever dollar as a kid.
How I made my first dollar as a kid. It was actually when I was 11 years old. And, I actually grew up in a pretty, poor family. And to help my parents, I used to clean synagogues. And that was my first job. And I just brought some money home to help out. So that was the first actually shekel, not even a dollar, but a shekel that we go with shekels in Israel. That was the first shekel that I've ever made.
Well, you're the first person to call it a shekel, not a dollar. So that's awesome. But talk to me a little bit about that upbringing. I know in your bio, and you mentioned that you did come from a very blue collar upbringing. What was it like, and what was growing up in Israel like?
Well, growing up in Israel in the 80s was pretty interesting. I remember hearing stories about people who left and went to America, and most of them were in real estate. Most of them were, pretty successful. And these are the kind of stories that I grew up on. My aunt left Israel when I was about around the same age, 11 or 12. And she moved to LA. Now she's back in Israel, but she used to live here for about 20 years. And she became wealthy. So for me, just being in America, I understood that this is the land of opportunities. That's kind of, and that's how I grew up by, it was, on the one hand, I saw the people that moved to the States and were very successful and were willing to work hard. And on the other hand, I've experienced the Gulf War. That was kind of early 90s. And the situation was not a very, ordinary, I think, childhood. On one hand, you have to deal with wars, and at school you have drills. You need to find the nearest shelter and what to do when there is a bomb attack. But I think I had a pretty good childhood, even though I took care of my brother and sisters, and growing up kind of, I made sure they were doing homework and helping them with their chores and everything. So I didn't understand that it was an abnormal childhood, that I'm the oldest of 4 kids taking care of, the siblings, that I'm cleaning, houses and synagogues when I'm 11 years old. It seemed to be pretty normal until at some point, the kids in my neighborhood made me realize that we were poor because the clothes they donated to charity ended up at our house, and I was wearing them, and then they recognized the shirt that they donated. And that was a very interesting experience, but it's still something that I remember until today, because that was the moment kind of where I said, I will not have this this life. When I'm old enough to take care of myself, I'm going to do whatever in my power to build a better life for myself, for my future kids. And that was this is where the fire kind of started, when I understood I was in the bottom of society. And in Israel, at least, of course, I'm not comparing myself to people in other countries that are suffering. But for me, that was kind of my reality, and I understood where I was in my cosmic, in my little universe. And that's what started the fire, and it's still burning. It doesn't matter how successful I am or will be, how much money I have or will have, this little incident is always going to be in the background. It's always going to be, that's always going to be the driving force behind everything I do.
That's so interesting to have that pain as a young child, to experience that, to understand that yes, you don't come from means, and having probably that point where you have wearing a shirt or a jumper or whatever it was that someone else recognized is it's a pretty defining moment in your life, and saying that you're going to move away from that pain and into making a better life for yourself. It's very interesting that your auntie moved back to Israel, and I know that a lot of Israelis have moved back. Has it changed a lot over the years since you grew up there in the 80s and around the Gulf War?
It's an interesting question. I think actually, most Israelis that I know that have had moved here, they actually stayed in the U.S. My aunt, she just got sick at some point and she decided to go back and be with her family.
Mm-hmm.
But many Israelis, they like it in here because there are a lot of opportunities here that we don't have in Israel. So for even syndication, this model does not really exist there. We don't have Freddie Fannie, an agency, debt that can lend us money in such great, terms and low interest rate, even though now it's increasing a little bit. But these opportunities are not there. And a lot of people that were in Israel and very much middle class could move here and live comfortably, while in Israel, this opportunity is not there because there's clientele base is much smaller. We're a much smaller country. The income is not proportional to expenses. So expenses rise over the years, but income is stagnant. So it's very, very hard to save money. I remember when I was in Israel, I was working full time and I had a law office that I was operating after hours, and I was not able to buy a house, to buy a car. It was just, I lived in Tel Aviv, and so I didn't have much money by the end of the month because expenses were just very high. And at that point I realized, I have to be in a place that will give me opportunity to actually earn what I'm worth. And I just couldn't see it over there.
Did you do your military time back in the day?
Interesting question. So in Israel, everyone has to go to the army. And I actually did not because I was married at that time. I got married. I was born in to a very religious family, and we all get married when we get to 18 years old, 19 years old. And that's what I did.
Interesting.
And I was married. I had to work and pay rent, and I actually worked in 2 jobs. There was no way I could go to the army because when you go to the army, you get something like $100 a month, which is kind of a stipend. And I knew I could not survive on $100 a month income. I had to pay for food, for electricity, for rent. And that's why I did not actually go to the army. One of my biggest regrets, by the way.
Is it? That's interesting because I've met actually a lot of Israelis who have that no BS, and I'm swearing the show, no bullshit. Like Israelis are very similar to Australians in that there's no filter. They'll just tell it how it is, and it's just like, no, I'm going to call you on your shit right now. And a lot of Israelis, I sort of have an affinity with, because it's like, I know you're not going to pull, we're going to talk on just mano to mano, very, very plain English, and, not try to pull the wool over each other's eyes. I used to work for an Israeli guy in New York City who was a developer. So he was a hustler, and that military-esque of background that everyone has to go through, I think, besides obviously very rare cases, brings a hardness to the people of particularly the now 30s and 40s folks that were probably back when they were 18, 19, 20, having to go through the 2 years of military. Also, being backpacking around the world a little bit myself, seeing the Israeli people coming out of the army and then going nuts a little bit, in South America and Southeast Asia. They're out there to have a good time and have a good party. So I've partied a lot with some awesome Israeli folks. So it's pretty freaking cool. But talk to me about the coming to America story. You came here to study, is that right? So you were a lawyer in Tel Aviv, and then you came here to study at MIT, is that right?
Yeah, so I was a lawyer back in Israel, and I was actually in commercial real estate law, and I experienced 2008 with my clients. And after the crash, I actually decided to transition to property management, and so
Mm.
I worked for a very big company in Israel for 4 years as a property manager. And at some point, I realized that America is a place for me, because I remember learning about the self-made men and in college, and I said, I'm going to be a self-made woman. I know there are opportunities there that are just they're not they're not existed. I can't just find them in Israel. So that's when I realized, I want to go back. At that point, after 10 years, I got a divorce, and I was single. I was living in Tel Aviv. I was working as a property manager, and at some point, I met an amazing guy who became that was about 9 years ago, became my husband. So he's my husband today. And he was also an American. And I had to convince him at some point to go back to the United States, because he wanted to try something new, and he traveled back to Israel. And he was working in Israel. He wanted to experience something different. So in the States, he went to Wharton, and then he was in consulting, and then he decided to do something a bit different. And at some point I said, hey, I'm ready to move. And I thought, I'm coming from Israel. All my credentials, all the companies that I worked for, nobody really recognized them in the States, and I have to
Hmm.
build my reputation. And what a better way to do it than to go to a reputable school in the States? And I actually chose to go to business school because I understood that I had the legal background and experience. I had the actual property management experience. And now I was lacking the business component, and I wanted to learn how to start businesses, how to read financial reports more professionally, and how to market my company. I knew I wanted to start a company, but it wasn't clear to me what exactly, what kind of company is going to be real estate or not. um, and yeah, so I moved here. That was 2004, March of 2004, 14, sorry. And I moved with my husband, and I went to MIT. I chose the maybe besides Chicago, the coldest place with an interesting business school that I could find, which was very challenging. I've never experienced walking down the street, and not having access to my phone to call Uber to go back home when I'm in downtown, because it's so cold. The phones just shut off. You can't turn them on. So you have to find shelter somewhere and warm your phone for 20 minutes until it's back on, and pray it's still going to be back on. It's still going to be on when the Uber is going to try and find you. So very tough 2 years in terms of weather. Uh, when I arrived, I had it was kind of a not a cultural shock, but a weather shock. It was the all time. I think it was the toughest winter in 100 years, 100-year record of snow amounts, and it was. I'm from Israel. I'm not used to see snow. And I've seen snow maybe twice before I came to the States. And I'm walking outside of my apartment, and you don't see cars because the cars are completely covered
In
by
snow.
snow. It was just insane. So but it was a very good experience, to get to know people from all around the world, and to be exposed to the American culture. That was something that I really enjoyed.
Yeah, it's interesting that you took that path of realizing that you needed something to make you different, or assimilate to the American culture in terms of an education. A lot of people, myself not included, I knew that I had to, when I came here to try and find a civil engineering job or a structural engineering job, I knew that I'd be behind the eight ball because I was educated outside of America. And there's this whole stigma about being American educated. Moving to New York City, realizing that everyone was an expat and everyone came from outside of the United States. So it was sort of like, I don't need to, I didn't go to school, but it was sort of like I had that stigma in my mind of I was going to be behind the eight ball because of where I was educated in Australia. If fine university, a very top 50 in the world, but it was like, from a HR perspective, like, cancelled or throw in the bin because his resume shows the University of Queensland in Brisbane, not MIT. So I definitely understand where you're coming from to try and assimilate to the American culture. Talk to me a little bit about that change, the transition in from you've come here, you've got your education, you now have a very well-paying job, and how do you then transitioned out of that job to go and pursue a career that you really, really wanted to do, which was start, Blue Lake Capital, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I actually moved to California. I got a job offer at a tech company, and at some point, the company was not doing very well, and they've decided that my team is the first one to go. I was in business operations, so basically, I was looking at the different parts of the company, and I was in charge of making improvements to each team. And of course, nobody wants to hear what they're doing wrong and how they now need to do things differently. And so the president has decided that one of one of the first people to like let go being let go is, my team should be disassembled. And uh it was interesting because my at some point my manager was gone, my coworkers were gone, and I was the only one that was left. And that's because the CEO really liked me, and he kept me there for as long as he could. And at some point he said, I'm sorry, I mean, everyone else is gone. I'm
You're the
giving
last
you some
one.
work to do. Yeah, exactly. But you know what, that period was a really good period. I think it was of about 6 months where no one was there, it was only me. It was a really good time because I had a lot of time on my hands, and I had a lot of time to start thinking, what do I want to do for my next step? And I started reading books and listening to podcasts, and I went back to real estate. Was kind of my bread and butter for so many years. And I started thinking about investing and looking into whether I wanted to do fix and flips, whether I wanted to do single family homes, maybe mobile home parks. I started to kind of look into different asset classes because I had a lot of time to learn and understand, what's out there, until I got to multifamily and I understood that this is it. And I discovered syndication and understood that this is what I wanted to do. But this is kind of how I transitioned. So, at some point, I was actually interviewing, I was looking into investing in real estate and also interviewing for other companies.
Mm.
And I realized at some point that if I ever wanted somebody to evaluate my talent and write me a check, I don't want it to be an employer. I actually want it to be an investor, someone who can trust my abilities and trust my judgment and my skills, and write me a check and invest with me. And this is where I transitioned, and I said, you know what? I'm not going to look for a job anymore. I'm not going to pursue this path. I'm going to start something on my own. It was scary because you're coming from a very comfortable life. You arrive in the office at 10, you leave at 3 or 4. I was doing more than they gave me to do, and I was always taking on more projects, but I was just able to do them faster than they expected. I think it's also a cultural difference. Israelis are used to do things, very quickly, and we're just going through it. I don't really know why we're like that, but this is how we are approaching things. And here everything is working, slow, kind of slower, I guess.
Which is
And
interesting to
that's
say
fine.
for Americans, right? Because everyone thinks that Americans are fast-paced, intense. But you're right. It's Israelis can
No.
probably bring it. They can hold their own when it comes to hustle.
Well, I used to go to my coworkers and other employees and say, okay, we have a project. We need to do A, B, C, D, E. And the feedback I got was, whoa, slow down. We need to process this. We're doing things differently. We're not ready to execute just yet. And everything took, more time. And that's why I had a lot of time on my hands even before they disbanded my team.
Mm.
So, and but I went from a very easy, comfortable, cushy 6-figure job to making no money at first, because it always takes time for any business to be profitable. You go from zero to a little bit of income to higher income to be profitable. There are kind of stages along the way, and you have to be okay with it. You have to know that you have to have enough money or someone else that can support you, that you are not under pressure, especially as a syndicator, to close deals just because you need the fees to survive, because then you're pushed to take the wrong deals and do deals, for the wrong reasons. But that was kind of my transition.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. I'm assuming with your husband, you spoke about this transition out of the workforce, and he was there to say, "Yeah, I support you," and I've got, it's going to take a period of time to get to a profitable business. So obviously, I assume he was on board, and because it takes the closest to you to support that leap of faith, to know that it will work eventually, right? So do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I think it's super important when you do start a business, and to have the spouse or your partner on board with you 100% of the way, to know that you're going to be successful. And I'm going to, I'll take care of the bills for the next year. You go out and build your little business, because I know ultimately you've got it within you to go and give it a shot.
Yeah, Reed, it's a very, very good question. And sometimes the partner that wants to make the change has all the information and they're so into it, and the other partner is coming to it, and it's a bit different because they're kind of looking at it from the outside. They're not necessarily understanding the potential or how
Right.
long it's going to take. So it's very important to basically make sure that you're both on the same page, that you have the same knowledge, you have the same tolerance for risk, that you understand how long it's going to take. You're not going to become profitable in 3 or 4 months unless you're doing 3 deals every month, and that's not realistic
Right.
or recommended. But yeah, my partner was very supportive, and I'm lucky that he was, because I know for others, and I'm talking to a lot of people who they're saying, I want to do what you're doing, but my partner, I need to talk to my wife or my husband, make sure they're on board. It's a process like anything else. You did not even, as um, an aspiring syndicator, you didn't go from 0 to 1 and understood this is what you want to do, and you're absolutely committed within a week. It was a process for you. So make sure you include your partner in that process, so when you're ready to make that jump, then they're in the same place with you. It
Right.
takes time for people to process changes, and I mean, it's some people respond better than others to it, but it is a process. And I have to say that I do see a difference between those who have dedicated themselves to syndication 100%, and those who are still holding on to their W-2 jobs and trying to do it on the side. You just see the major difference there in how well they're doing, how many deals they're doing, and generally speaking, how successful they are. You can't do both.
Right. And look, it comes down to horses for courses, right? And it's your own path. And I think the biggest thing that I know, I talk to a lot of syndicators, a lot of business owners, is run your own race, right? You are lucky enough to have a husband that can support you and allow you the time and freedom, mental time and freedom as well, because it also takes mental clarity. But I know some other folks, myself included, we had to sort of spin the plates, right? You have to have the full-time job to keep the roof over the head, because I might be the breadwinner, but to keep the side hustle going. And a lot of people start out with juggling a couple of things, i.e., family, work, W-2 job, and a business or a side hustle. And it is at that point that I talk to a lot of folks who are like, they get burnt out, and it's understanding to run your own race. Yes, you want to be successful tomorrow, but in reality, it takes time. And that time, financial freedom, having a successful, profitable business, it will take time, and having the right mindset going in and having the support structure around from the loved ones is really super important in order to allow you, me, whoever you are as an entrepreneur, to build something from nothing, and understanding that it will take time, but having the faith in that person that they will make it happen. So I think it's really important, and something that probably not a lot of people talk about is around the home space and having a support network around you in order to help you be successful, and in order to help you be successful quicker, in my opinion. So yeah. But let's dive into a little bit more of the nuts and bolts of what you do. So you mentioned the word syndication. We obviously talk a lot about real estate syndication on this show. So where are you buying right now? We're sitting here at the end of March. Corona is amongst us. I'm in my kitchen recording this podcast. Usually I'm in a little office space, but unfortunately not. So how are you reacting and what are you doing now, and as this wave of change is coming? Because obviously back in 2019, things were frothy. I'm a buyer. I've just bought deals, just closed on a deal last week. And I'm sure you're the same, but now this is going to completely change the game. So what are you doing, and how are you being prepared?
Interesting question. So, to your first question, I buy in Texas, Florida, and Georgia, and I focus on major MSAs in those markets. MSAs that are have diverse, industries job wise. And what do I do, to your other question? What do I do to prepare? I think for future deals, and I do believe that you can find deals in any market and in any part of the cycle if you buy right. You have to be even more conservative and careful than you usually are. So one of the ways that we adjust is by looking at bad debt, for instance, which is basically all the delinquencies, all the rents you cannot collect. Because you're always going to have some people that won't be able to pay full rent. And usually we would look at it and say, okay, in a good market, we can burn it off over time, meaning we can basically bring new tenants that can pay, higher quality tenants. And now we're looking at the market and we say, okay, this is probably going to affect a lot of people. Let's triple or quadruple the bad debt. Let's just look at an unreasonable scenario where bad debt is going to triple for 5 years. I'm sure it's not going to be the case, in terms of the length of the impact of the coronavirus. But let's just say that's the case. Is the deal still working? Let's push. Right now vacancy is 4%. Let's push it to 10 or 15, maybe 10 or 12. Let's see if the deal still works. Am I still profitable? At what point am I breaking even? If the property has to drop to 60%, for instance, to be, and that's my break even point, then I feel comfortable, because I think it's unreasonable to think that half of it is going to, or 40% is going to be vacant. And so I think that's one way of how we're getting, how we're prepared for it, because we're actually looking at the underwriting and we're tightening the belt even more, and we're being more conservative. Now, with our current properties, so we've done a few things. The first thing is kind of taking care of people's health and livelihood and their lives. That's more important than anything else, more than money, more than anything else. So we've instructed our property management company to minimize contact as much as possible. We've educated our tenants when it comes to the CDC regulations. We close all the common areas, the pools, that it's kind of a winter right now, so I'm not using it, but the clubhouse, all the areas where people can have an opportunity to congregate, we just close them right now, just to avoid spreading the disease in case, in case a tenant has it. And we train, our property management company actually trained the employees. If something happens, they'll know who to call, and that person, it has been trained, so they'll know what to do if someone shows symptoms, how to help them, where to take them. So we know what to do. We're not just scrambling for answers and trying to understand what happens if someone is sick at your property. So that's very important to do, kind of to mitigate the risk and keep people healthy. On top of that, we're getting ready to deal with delinquencies. And I have to say that as a person, as a human being, if someone is sick, I can find it in my heart to evict them. Doesn't matter, how savvy a businessman or woman, how they look at their business. Just evicting sick people is something that is problematic. And I think there are also orders that prevent it from happening. So we're getting ready to deal with people who are not going to be able to pay rent because they're either sick or they're quarantined or they lost their jobs. Then what do we do? So how do we work on a payment plan to basically make sure we get the rent, but maybe we give them, they can pay 60 or 70% now, and the rest, is going to be kind of pushed to, next month or the month after. So we're trying to find the right balance between staying human and understanding that it's going to impact it is impacting the entire world, but we're still, business owners, and we need to take care of, of our investors as well. Trying to find that fine line. And I can tell you that we're also looking into collaborating with charities to deliver food to our tenants that are going to have a difficult time maybe getting, groceries because they're either sick and delivery is not an option, or they lost their jobs and right now they need help. So, you know, we made money by collecting rents from those tenants, and now some of them need us because not because they don't want to pay, because they're in trouble. And I think it's our duty and responsibility as owners who have made money in real estate to kind of look at our communities and understand what we can do to take care of other people who are in need right now.
I think that's incredibly important to staying human. I just wrote that down. I think it was a really important thing that you just said. It's because it's really important as an owner to stay human and have that human touch with the tenants. And people, you see on Facebook, oh, rent's due at the end of the month and real estate this and real estate that's better than the stock market. It's like, no, if people don't work, you don't get paid rent. And I'm sure the type of demographic that you house, the similar demographic that I house, in between the $30,000 to $60,000 a year range, low cost affordable housing, right? So these folks, I know on our portfolio, we did very, very much this, very similar to what you were saying, but also looking at understanding what the impact's going to be. So what percentage of folks are service-based employees, are contractors, and understanding what that impact's going to be. But having that human touch and kindness to understand that this is going to change over time, and that people may not be able to afford it. So doing other things, how do you get rent? How do you get new tenants to come in? Well, maybe you need to double down on your notice to vacates. You need, instead of doing a 50% renewal rate, go and try and get that up to 90% or 100%. So offer $0 increases on your renewals. Working with payment plans, I think, is really, really important. But also understanding that delinquency, that as you underwrite new deals, and don't get me wrong, because there are going to be deals coming into this market right now. When big institutional shops can't fly from New York City because they're restricted, and you're on the boots on the ground and you're looking at deals, reach out to your brokers. There's going to be deals that can't get done because of these restrictions and travel. So can you sweep in there and snap up a really good deal? But how do you underwrite that correctly in order to mitigate those risks coming in? You talk about bad debt, increasing delinquency, increasing vacancy, and modeling that out. I want to talk a little bit about the investor side of it, because I think all that's really important on the human touch. How are you messaging it to investors? Because you spoke about the word profitability before. And I know from owning assets that if you drop to an 80% occupancy, which is not that, like, between, it's probably maybe 10 basis points. And if you have a 200 unit portfolio property, that's like 20 to 40 people, right? And 20 or 40 people could be affected. Let's not get wrong. This is not it's not rocket science. How are you telling investors that distributions can't be made? Because this will affect cash flow.
So I would do whatever is in my power to keep distributions as planned. I prefer personally, and that's my personal opinion, I prefer not to stop distributions at this point. We have some reserves, and I think we're positioned to handle the next 2 to 3 months pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't like to stop distributions. I think if as long as we're making money, there's no reason to not distribute it to investors. We make sure that all the distributions are accepted after, of course, we pay the debt and after we pay expenses. And whatever is left when we distribute to investors, of course, they come before we get paid. So I don't see a reason why to stop it right now. Again, assuming that we are able to pay the expenses. So I had a conversation with my property management company yesterday, and we looked into, and we do it, every quarter anyways, but we looked into every line item and we said, what is necessary, absolutely necessary to do right now in terms of expenses? Uniforms for the maintenance guys? No, this is not necessary. We're going to cut it. Utilities have to be paid, but other, line items, whatever we can do, marketing, we need to be smart about where we market, because people are not going to come to, people are not leaving their homes, which means, as you mentioned, we shifted our focus from marketing to renewals to put more emphasis on renewing and increasing. We're about 60-65% renewal rate, push it up to 80-90%, because more likely we can convince tenants to stay put and not go look for another apartment. So I think, to your question, distributions, we're going to keep doing that. I think that's after being human and finding the right balance between being profitable and taking care of people, the second part is to make sure, second priority is to make sure we are paying our bills, we're paying our debt, whatever is left. I feel comfortable distributing that to our investors.
Yeah, well, the big thing is going to be it's uncertainty, right? How long is this thing going on for?
Right.
How long? You're saying you got some reserves, and we all, as good operators, you always should. My philosophy is a little different. I'd rather keep cash on hand, given the uncertain times, than I would distribute it to investors. And I know we've communicated that to our investors, and they've all been very understandable, because it's, at the end of the day, it's a pref. It's you sit above us and it accrues. So if you don't get it paid, because this could go on for six to 9 months, right? And if you're dropping, if your delinquency increases by 5% or 10%, or your vacancy increases, that's going to affect your DCR, debt service coverage ratio. And so you need to be very conscious of what that buffer is. Hopefully it's above 20% buffer, but if it starts dropping towards 1, where your income, your NOI is equal to your debt, you have no profit, right? You can't distribute money. So full distributions, I think, are going to be something we are going to look at if we even pay full distributions. We've got a full distribution coming up here in April. But definitely different philosophies because of the uncertain nature of this whole thing. This could go on for months. If this goes on for 9 months, then you need to keep cash on hand. You do not want to be giving the keys back to the bank. So getting in front of your lenders. I know I've already had 2 conversations with 2 different lenders. There's nothing wrong right now, but hey, what's the policy moving forward? What are you going to do? You're going to work with us if something goes wrong? Because I don't know what's going to go wrong. I've got a lot of people that are in that service-based business that could potentially be an issue. And if you read the media and believe the media, it has a little bit, it's still got some legs, right? And we haven't got to the top of the peak. So when that comes and how that plateaus out and how we recover and bounce back when restaurants and shops and all that sort of stuff reopen, hopefully be quickly. But as an operator, you need to be very much aware of where the cash is coming from and what cash reserves you do have on hand, and obviously communicating that to investors. Investors understand they're stuck in their home right now as well, probably with their kids, probably pulling their hair out. But but it's very, very important to keep doubling down on the books. And I really like what you said about the making sure you're only spending money on what is actually important today, because you can save money. What's your thoughts on? I know in our portfolio, we're doing more virtual tours. We actually got 3 leases last week with virtual tours. I actually think this is an opportunity to change the property management game in order to be more online, in order to maybe in the future reduce payroll, because you don't need 3 people in your leasing office. Maybe you only need 2 because you have more virtual tours. We actually captured 3 virtual tours sight unseen through Facebook live videos that were really kind of cool, and the property management game, let's not lie, it's a little bit slower in terms of technology compared to other businesses around the world. So around the place. So what are your sort of thoughts on that, as from an opportunistic point of view, changing the way in which we used to do business into something new and fresh because of the coronavirus?
Yeah, Reed, I think it's a very good point. And I had a conversation with our property management company saying exactly the same. This is an opportunity to become, more technological savvy, to see how we can do things remotely. And I think you can see it in other industries, not even property management. You see a lot of people who find out that, hey, we can actually do our job from work, maybe not as well, with all the kiddos running around, but you can definitely see how I think it kind of made us understand that we can do a lot of things, remotely and digitally. And we're definitely implementing that. So our leasing officer already started doing some shows, using, Zoom or Facebook. And these are all great tools. And definitely, we'll look into it after all this madness is over. And by the way, I think it's going to be short-lived, just by looking at what's happening. On one hand, in China and South Korea, you see the growth rate, you see it's flattening. On the other hand, we're not taking as extreme measures as they do. So we're probably, in South Korea, it took them about 30 to 40 days to have the curve flat, pretty much flattened. And I don't think, we're past that point, because we're also not testing. They're testing 70 times as many people as we do here in the States. I think they're testing 2,500 people for every million people. We're testing about 40 or 50 or so per million. So that's why I think we should have, come out of this by now, but I think it's going to take another month or two until we're fully out of it. But I think we're already in a recession. And I think that this is going to be a short recession, because think about it. Once businesses are open, they're going to rehire people pretty quickly. People that are eager to go back and sit at coffee shops and buy clothes and sit at restaurants, they're going to be a demand. And you already see it in China. They're coming out of, output is already at 50% capacity, manufacturing. So yes, I mean, it's something to keep in mind, but I think this is right now where it's important. When you buy in a very good location. So we're looking at properties that have very solid tenant base, that the average or the median household income is 60, 70, 80, $90,000, because we believe that those communities are going to be in a much better position to pay, to pay their rents and not to default on their rents. Right. Now, when it comes to investors, you see it's very different. You see some investors are deciding to sit on the sideline and see what happens. And then you have a lot of people that actually pull their money out of the stock market. And they understand, okay, what are their options? In the stock market, they're going to lose their money right now. Just sit on cash. That will make them zero or very, very minimal interest rate. And real estate seems to be the safest option right now. You might not make 10% cash on cash. You might not make 8% cash on cash. But 6 to 7, 7.5, it's a lot better than all the other alternatives. So you are going to grow your wealth. You're going to preserve your wealth. And, if it's going to be a short-lived, situation, you're even going to make money. And so I think it's really important. I see deals around me, closing. There's investors understand it. I think, some are scared, but the vast majority, I think, is still looking to deploy their capital, understanding the other, the opportunity cost of not investing right now and just making zero money. Your money is not growing. If you keep it in the stock market, it's going to deplete or, disappear. And so real estate, I think, it always has been. If you look in, it's really a solid investment. If you look at 2008, multifamily default rate was 0.5%, less than 0.5%. So yeah, of course, we're in a different situation now, but just to show you how resilient, not recession proof, nothing is recession proof, but recession resilient multifamily is. And that's why I think investors are still going to invest in real estate.
100% agree.
Specifically.
I 100% agree. And two things that I want to double down on just before we come to the end of the show here is understanding that tenant base and looking for better quality assets in order to back into to know that tenants will pay their money on time because they have better paying jobs. Now, the returns are not going to be as great because everyone wants to be in that space, right? We're talking Class A types of deals rather than Class C types of deals. But I think it's very important for the longevity of capital over a long period of time. That we are coming into, a new era of investing and how to be smart and savvy about understanding where the deals are going to potentially suffer from an income point of view, from tenants paying their actual rent. So what jobs or what's the demographic what's the major employer within the demographic, I think is super, super important. But also understanding that where else is your money going to sit right now? Can sit in a bank account? Sure. You've probably lost a little bit of money in the stock market? Sure. But you can still keep investing in real estate and still make a very solid return of between 5 and 7% cash on cash each year. Hopefully the deals are supporting that. So I think it's super important, and you've made some incredible golden nuggets here of information. But we are coming to the end of the show, and I want to be very respectful of your time. At the end of every show, we like to get into the top 5 investing tips. You ready to get into it?
Yeah, let's do it.
What is the daily habit that you practice to keep on track towards your goals?
Daily habit. Well, I try to prioritize, and so I read a book by Gary Keller, and basically the one thing, and so I'm practicing this where the first 3 to 4 hours of every day, I'm focusing on the one thing, the most important thing. So, and that's kind of what I'm trying to stick to.
Got it. I love it. I'm do you do any morning rituals around that? Like meditation or not looking at your phone or making sure you're blocking out a certain period of time that you can not have to do stuff and not look at the screen?
I wish my answer would be yes, but unfortunately it's not. But I do, I mean, every night I kind of prioritize what I need to do and kind of what I need to focus, for the first part of the day. And I'm trying not to do, other things. I wish I could meditate. I just don't have the patience. I feel like there's so many other things that are happening around me that I can be doing.
Take
My
a breath.
husband loves
It's
it,
gonna
but
be fine.
I
Meditation,
know.
trust me. You'll pick it up and you'll love it, and you'll see you in a year's time. You read. Thanks for pushing meditation.
You should speak to my husband because he's all about meditation. Has been trying to convince me for the longest time, and I just
Do
don't
it.
have the patience.
Do it.
I'll try.
You
Maybe
know
tonight.
that's an excuse. That's and I'm going to call bullshit on that. So, question number 2: who is the most influential person in your career today?
Sam Zell.
Sam Zell, love it.
Yes, his conservatism and he's been pointing out on the abnormality of having this amazingly strong market for 10 years now. And so and the way that he started his career in real estate, and he has a great book called Am I Being Loud Enough, I think, or something along those lines. Highly recommended. Very, very interesting dude.
Awesome. Sam Zell, definitely check him out for sure. Question number 3. You would have an influential tool in your business. And when I say tool, I mean, it could be a physical tool like a phone or a laptop or a person or a software. What is the number one tool that you use in your business on a daily basis?
I would say Airtable. Airtable is a very, very powerful tool for us.
What
Airtable,
is that?
Yeah. So it's a free online kind of website where you can use it for so many things. The main resource we use it is for just acquisition tracker. So it's kind of a fancy Excel based website where we can see every deal where it is, and we push it down the different stages so everyone in the team knows when they need to step in and take charge of that that part of the process.
Have you ever used Smartsheets? Is it similar to Smartsheets? Smartsheets is sort of like Excel comes Excel scheduler come Trello online. Very sounds very similar to Airtable. Yeah, check. Smartsheets is not free, unfortunately. It's a very expensive. But
Airtable is.
Yeah, everything is, right? So awesome. Well, I definitely have to check out Airtable. I've written that down. In one sentence, what has been the biggest failure in your career? What did you learn from that failure?
My biggest failure in my career, real estate or any
just
career?
In life. Doesn't what's been the biggest failure that you've learnt from?
I don't think of things as failures, but obviously, a lot of setbacks for sure. The biggest one, which one I don't know which one to choose. I mean, I tried to get into Harvard. I couldn't. I did not get even an interview. That was a failure. I'm trying to think, back in Israel, I mean, we all have failures. We fail. We have little failures along the way. Hopefully not a big one. I'm trying to think which one would be interesting to talk about. I think for me, when I was a lawyer and I was working on deals, real estate deals, and we were negotiating with European banks on huge construction loans, and we saw that something was happening. They didn't return our calls. They did not reply to our emails. And that was 2000, and back then, 20 years ago. But I think our failure was to not really, and I don't know what we could have done differently, but not really understanding and protecting our clients, because we felt that something was going on, but we were not quick to understand. We kind of accepted the fact that communication is a bit slower from the bank's point of view, because they understood before we did what was happening. News kind of came a little bit late to Israel. And in the meantime, our clients they were spending money starting to build and dig, and they were building an office space in Eastern Europe. So I think that's one failure as a lawyer, not to kind of understand that this behavior is not normal, where the lender is completely ignoring you, and you need to get to the bottom of this. And at the same time, kind of advising your clients something is up, just gave you a heads up, maybe you want to pause and reconsider until we get answers, because the client was so confident in the loan they're going to get before it was approved and finalized. They already started to dig in and start building
spending money.
Exactly. They spent a lot of money because they thought it was just a matter of time. And guess what? The loan never came. So
right. So I guess the lesson is learning to read the tea leaves before, or writing on the wall before it becomes too late. Right.
Yeah. And I can tell you that, I've been reading a lot about the virus, and I was flying with masks since the last 2 weeks of January.
Mm-hmm.
And actually my brother that still lives in Israel, he brought it to my attention and said, hey, I think something is going on. You need to check. You need to pay close attention to it. And then I flew to New Zealand. I spent 2 weeks there at the end of January. The whole flight, I was actually wearing a mask, and people, 13 hours, and I'm with a mask. People looked at me like I was crazy. And I had to keep flying, to my properties in Atlanta, come back. And when I did it, you could see the shift in people's behavior from what's wrong with you? Why are you wearing this black weird mask to how did you get it? Because there's nothing on Amazon. We can't get masks anymore. So I think part of it is, trying to read the signs and, understand
be aware.
If something is wrong, you have to understand. We were looking at what's happening in China. It was not in the States yet. And my husband and I just did 1+1. There's something going on there. It's very bad. Flights are coming in. People are infecting others without knowing. It will come here. It's a matter of time, and it's going to be bad. And that's why, we pulled our money out of the stock market way before the big crash.
Awesome.
Because we saw it coming. So I think, to your point, it's very, very important to see some signs, to understand what was going on, and to dig for information.
Sure.
Don't just expect what be okay with what you see in the media. Dig for more information. Go look for information. If you see some abnormalities, dig in, find that information, and act. And just don't sit in the sidelines and just get information from. Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Well, look, final question before we end the show is, where can people reach you to continue the conversation? They want to be in your sphere a little bit more. Where do they go?
Excellent question. So you can Google my name, Ellie Perlman. My website is just ellieperlman.com, and Ellie is ELLIE. And you can also email me to ellie@ellieperlman.com. That's it.
Awesome. Well, look, I want to thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to jump on the show. I just want to quickly recap some of the things that I took away from today's show. I think the biggest thing is having a plan and having an idea of what's going to go wrong when stuff starts to shift. I think we just, you summarized it very, very well there in terms of your failure, that you saw something was going wrong because the bank wasn't calling you back, and not digging in when you notice something abnormal like that, as small as you may think it is, it might be an issue. And so making sure you're doing your diligence and following up and understanding what's going on to then advise your client on the potential that the loan may not come through. I think that's super, super important. I also like the fact that you're talking about how you're humanizing this issue and making sure people are coming first in and around your communities that you own, so that they are being taken care of first and foremost, and then worrying about the business, not necessarily second, but making sure people are healthy and safe, and have food on the table and shelter, roof over their head. So I think those are the two big key takeaways. Did I leave anything out?
I think that's about it. Yeah, these are the most important points. Good summary.
Awesome stuff. Well, look, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll catch up very, very soon.
Thank you, Reed. Be safe.
Well, there you have another cracking episode jam-packed with some incredible advice from Ellie. Please do head over to her website at ellieperlman.com. She has a bunch of awesome stuff over there that you can check out, free resources, blogs, videos, and just to get in and around her sphere, go and check her out. I want to thank you all again for taking some time out of your day to continue to grow your financial IQ, because that's what we're all about here on this show. And we're going to do it all again next week. So be bold, be brave. Remember, go give life a crack.